How about what are some signs of compromise in a believer's life?
Oh, what are signs of compromise? Let's see. Biblically speaking, well, let me give you a couple that Paul the Apostle actually talks about. There's a passage in 1 Timothy chapter 2 where in verse 18 Paul says to Timothy, "This charge I commit to you, son Timothy, according to the prophecies previously made concerning you, that by them you may wage the good warfare, having faith and a good conscience, which some having rejected concerning the faith have suffered shipwreck, of whom are Hymenaeus and Alexander, whom I delivered to Satan, that they may learn not to blaspheme." So how do you like your name in the Bible for that? In any case, what he talks about is having a good conscience and having a real trust in the Lord. That's what faith is, trust in the Lord. And so when we come into a relationship with God, the first thing that happens is we come in recognizing that we have to trust God for something, and what we're trusting him for is our salvation, that he's actually going to forgive us for our sin, that he's actually going to come inside and begin changing us. And what can happen over time is a relationship with God goes out the door, and all of a sudden you start having a relationship with religion. People are religious. And so I've known guys who smoked dope religiously, and took drugs religiously. And a lot of people who are into marijuana, it's like it's their religion, and they have all kinds of information about it, and that kind of thing. And so everybody is religious about one thing or another. I know some religious evolutionists, and in the sense that they make evolution their religion. I know some religious politicos. They make politics their religion. And what we're supposed to be doing is we're supposed to be having a relationship with God, not a relationship with Christianity. And so one of the things that you can see when somebody is starting to drift from Jesus is they stop calling him by name, and they stop talking about Jesus, and they start talking about Christ. And it's not that Christ is a bad term or something that is necessarily an indication, but that's one of the things that I've seen with people. It gets less personal over time, and so they're not, they're more into the religiosity of it, and it becomes more about the form at church. They're talking more about the religious observances than they are talking about Jesus. And so that's one of those things that I never want to fall into. I got into this thing not because I was interested in, and it's not that I don't pay attention to these things because they are important, but I got into this thing not because I was interested in doctrine or interested in historical Christianity or interested in the history of the Bible or interested in how church goes or interested in worship or interested, there's all these things that people get into. And again, it's not that I'm not interested in those things. They're just not the main thing. The main thing is Jesus. That's the reason that I came into, I became a believer. It's because of Jesus and what Jesus did for me. And so faith, having a real trust in God is the first thing. And then he talks about having a good conscience. If you have a right relationship with the Lord, then what's going to happen is you're going to have a purity about you. You're going to have a good conscience. And you're not going to be able to do certain things. You're not going to be able to live in a certain way. And so if you can do things that are things that Jesus does not want done, and you know that they're things that Jesus does not want done, and you can do them with impunity and you can go to sleep at night, you don't have a good conscience. And so it's an indication that there's a distance between you and the Lord, because God doesn't just let these things go. He wants us to walk with him. And most of us know what that feels like. You say something stupid, or you say something out of line, or you do something to somebody that's thoughtless, and there's a conflict that's there. And if you're not staying up at night over those things, there's something wrong with you, man. And what's wrong with you is the fact that you're getting distant from the Lord. That's pretty good. But basically, when I'll just leave it there because we could just go on and on with this. But basically, when I look at, you can tell where somebody's at as far as their walk with God by where they spend their money, by what they talk about, by what's on their Facebook page, by what they're putting on Instagram all the time, and over a lot of times when I am, I pay attention to people all the time, obviously, and so there are people that I watch. I've seen their Facebook pages or I've seen their posts on Instagram, and they start talking about Jesus and the Bible, and they're all excited about him. And then over time, that excitement goes away, and they start talking about something else. And the main problem that I see in church nowadays is that people replace Jesus with booze. It's ridiculous. And so you got somebody who's absolutely in love with the Lord, and all of a sudden they're taking pictures of what they're drinking that night. And that's a good indication of where a heart's at, and the fact that there's compromise going on, and that kind of stuff. And so again, it's like I'm supposed to be in love with the Lord all the time, and I'm supposed to be walking tight with him. When I begin compromising, worship isn't as important to me. When I become distant from the Lord, reading the Word at some point becomes less important to me. Usually when people are getting distant from the Lord, the Bible goes out the door. They don't want to spend a lot of time in the Word. Prayer goes out the door. They don't want to spend a lot of time in prayer. Their prayers change. And so it goes from a real personal thing to something that's more by rote, where they're going, kind of doing a religious observance type of thing. And you just never want to get there. And when somebody ends up walking away from the Lord, it's a slow fade. It takes place over time. And so when I see somebody that's just turned their heart away from the Lord, I know that what's been happening is there's been compromise over a long period of time. So got to watch our hearts.
Yeah, it reminded me of Revelation in, Jesus talking to the churches. And
Ephesus.
Well, actually, I was thinking of Pergamos, and the reason why is because I actually think of like our walks with the Lord like a marriage. And Pergamos is mixed marriage. It's like there's something that's come in, and it talks specifically about the doctrine of the Nicolaitans, which means to be like ruled by man. And I was thinking like, one of the things that happens, and I think it's more subtle, is when you start compromising, you start relying upon yourself.
Yeah.
And people don't necessarily see that. That's where you see these pastors who are very, very gifted. They could be out preaching a sermon, and it's like sometimes you're like, maybe you could see it, but a lot of people don't even know. They can't see it. That guy knows he's doing it. He's relying upon himself because he's obviously not listening to the Holy Spirit when he's compromising in all these areas and stuff. So
yeah, there's a way out of compromise too, and in Revelation chapter 2, Jesus talks to Ephesus. And he said, like Zach was talking about, the message to the church at Pergamos is specifically these guys have really begun compromising. But you see the seeds of that compromise in the church at Ephesus. And what Jesus says is, I see you, I know your works, I know your labor, I know your patience, and that you cannot bear those who are evil. And you've tested those who say they're apostles and are not, and have found them liars, and you've persevered and have patience, and have labored for my name's sake and have not become weary. Nevertheless, I have this against you: you've left your first love. And so that's the seeds of compromise. That's where it starts out. So you can be doing all this really good stuff, kind of on the periphery of that, but the central thing that we need to be paying attention to is our love for the Lord. And what he says to get out of that is remember, repent, and then repeat. It's real simple. Remember from where you've fallen. Remember what it was like when you first came into a relationship with the Lord. Remember how much you loved him. Remember how excited you were about him and about the things that he was speaking to you through the Bible. Not excited about the Bible, but excited about the things that God was showing you as he was speaking to you through the Bible. And again, I love the Bible. So you remember where you've fallen from. Repent. That means you just go, Lord, I'm sorry. I need to do a 180 here. That's what the word repent means. And then you repeat. You do the first works. And so I always want to be in a position where I still have that love for the Lord. And when I don't have the love for the Lord, I just ask Jesus to help me to love him the way that I'm supposed to. And like you said, it's like a marriage. I want my marriage relationship to be something that's tight. I don't want to be going through the motions. So.